I spoke to Jacob Kirkegaard, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and we started with his thoughts on the big nuclear energy deal.
With all these types of long-term infrastructure investments, this is going to usher in an ongoing relationship that's going to last for decades. So this is a big deal. This is if you want to put meat on whatever a new strategic relationship means, this is very much it.
For the record, China and the United Kingdom already have a fairly strong pre-existing relationship, right? So this isn't a new thing. This is a sort of a new era, as some people are calling it. They've also collaborated in the past with, for example, infrastructure projects such as high-speed rail and things of that nature. And there were some announcements made on that mark as well. And I'm wondering from you, how does the UK react to foreign investors coming in, building infrastructure in their country? Because that is something that is a little bit different.
Yeah, well, I mean, the UK has traditionally been among the most open countries, large countries, certainly in Europe, for foreign direct investment. It's also a country that, historically speaking, and compared to other European countries, has had what I would argue is a broad infrastructure deficit. Arguably because of Margaret Thatcher cutting spending way back in the 80s, they've had a deficit. So the attempt by the UK government to essentially bring in both Chinese investors but also Chinese firms to do infrastructure, particularly high-speed rail in the northern part of the sort of so-called northern corridor, et cetera, is not new. And it's not surprising, in my opinion, but I would still say that at this point, my sense is that we're still a bit in the aspirational phase. It isn't quite clear just how much money Chinese investors are going to put in. So we're at the project proposal phase.
Speaking of investors, the London Stock Exchange, the Shanghai Stock Exchange, the two announcing they would work together and collaborate on a lot more deals. Significance of that?
Again, this is one of those that I would call largely aspirational at this point in time, because I think it is very clear that the City of London more broadly as a financial center, the London Stock Exchange and some of the other exchanges in London have been trying to set up London as the principal European financial center for Chinese or transactions coming from China, renminbi clearing, et cetera. And in doing so, they're obviously competing with Frankfurt and Paris and other potential European financial centers. So the link up here between London and Shanghai is important. But the idea that the so-called Shanghai-London Stock Connect is going to be something equivalent to what you saw between Shanghai and Hong Kong, I think is a little far-fetched, to be honest, simply for logistical reasons. I mean, there's a time zone issue here that when Shanghai is open, London is closed.
Now, referencing the past a little bit, when the AIIB was previously announced as the big infrastructure fund being essentially launched by China, the UK quickly jumped on board. And a lot of people say, well, that was the beginning of sort of this closer relationship between the UK and China, because now China has seemingly returned the favor by saying very, very nice things about the UK and, of course, expanding these business relationships going forward. And I'm wondering from you if you think that was a catalyst, the AIIB.
I think in a political sense, yes, because there's no doubt that China, at a particular point in the launch phase, was looking for a political commitment or a first mover commitment from a major Western or G7 country when it was clear that the United States would not join. And the UK basically rose up and said, we'll join. And then, like 5 nanoseconds later, the other European countries, oh, yeah, we're joined too. But there's no doubt that this gave the British government and the current government, especially, credit with the Chinese, which has been, to a certain extent, reciprocated now. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's also clear that this willingness of the UK to basically sort of be first mover looked upon.
What about Europe? There's been a lot of talk that the Chinese and Europe sort of to stay together.
We would prefer for the UK to stay in the EU. which is, given that the UK is going to have a referendum on this issue in the not too distant future, in many ways was a very uncharacteristic direct interference by the Chinese government into what is essentially a domestic issue in the UK.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because it matters. It matters to the Chinese that it essentially signals very clearly that for making many of the investment commitments that they're doing in the UK is that the UK is part of the EU. Or put another way, if the UK were to quit the EU, well then a lot of the Chinese investments now flowing to the UK would leave with it.